The structural collapse of Kenya's economy. Section 1, the hook and the dilemma. Whenever Kenya plunges into a budget crisis, our public debate falls into a predictable trap. We argue passionately over percentages. How much should we tax fuel? What is the new levy on digital services? How much did the state borrow this quarter? But by focusing entirely on the budget, we are missing the forest for the trees. The real crisis in Kenya isn't just the tax rate inside a finance bill. It is a quiet, systemic design flaw inside the machinery of governance itself. Over the last 15 years, the architecture of Kenya's economic management has fundamentally shifted. The intellectual wing of government responsible for looking 20 years into the future has been steadily sidelined by a department forced to obsess over surviving the next 20 days. This isn't a simple story of bad intentions or political failure. It is a delicate, structural dilemma. To solve it, we must look past the emotional rants and understand the mechanics of how Kenya's economic engine actually broke down, and how to fix it. Section 2, the Kibaki era and the system of checks. To understand healthy economic design, we have to revisit the institutional framework of the 2000s under the late President Mwai Kibaki. During this period, Kenya achieved remarkable macroeconomic stability and expanded its tax base organically, without suffocating the private sector. This wasn't an accident of history, and nor was it just luck. It was the result of a deliberate bureaucratic design. The economic engine ran on two distinct, competing pillars. On one hand stood the National Treasury, tasked with fiscal discipline and accounting, asking, how much money do we have, and how do we manage it? On the other hand stood the Ministry of Economic Planning, tasked with macro strategy, asking, where is the economy going, and how do we stimulate wealth creation? This friction was intentional. The Treasury acted as the institutional brakes, protecting fiscal sanity. Economic planning acted as the accelerator, driving industrial policy and private sector growth. This institutional synergy is what birthed Vision 2030. Revenue collection was treated as a consequence of economic expansion, not the primary driver of it. Section 3, the global evidence, lessons from East Asia and West Africa. If we look beyond our borders, the absolute necessity of this institutional split becomes undeniable. Take South Korea during its rapid transformation in the late 20th century. They didn't let their tax collectors dictate industrial policy. Instead, they created a powerful economic planning board. Their sole focus was ensuring that every shilling spent or taxed directly accelerated private sector productivity. Contrast that with the economic histories of nations like Ghana or Zambia during various fiscal crises. Under immense pressure to service external debts, their national treasuries completely overshadowed their planning departments. The policy focus shifted entirely to aggressive domestic revenue mobilization and survival. The result? Tax regimes became unpredictable, local businesses collapsed under the weight of compliance, and the broader economy stagnated because no one was funding the long-term engines of growth. Section 4, the acceleration and the revenue trap. When we look at Kenya's trajectory over the past decade, we see a clear pivot toward this exact revenue-fast trap. Following the creation of Vision 2030, the focus of governance shifted decisively toward massive, capital-intensive infrastructure projects. Let's be fair to this strategy, infrastructure is the foundation of a modern economy. You cannot have industrial growth without railways, the expanded ports, and paved roads. However, the economic challenge was one of timing and cash flow. By fast-tracking these mega-projects using expensive, short-term commercial debt, the state overinvested in long-term assets while starving the short-term cash flow of the citizens. Consequently, the Ministry of Economic Planning was gradually left in the shadows. When massive global shocks hit, from inflation to soaring global interest rates, the current administration inherited an incredibly difficult hand. They didn't choose a revenue-fast approach out of preference, they were pushed into pure survival mode to prevent a sovereign debt default that would have destroyed the local banking sector. But an economy is a living ecosystem, not a corporate spreadsheet. When the state's primary economic focus becomes strictly restricted to revenue extraction through the Kenya Revenue Authority, it creates an aggressive fiscal environment that inadvertently deters investment and reduces cash flow in the local market. Section 5 is the structural remedies, the solutions. So, how do we solve this in a way that actually adds value? How does Kenya move away from a continuous cycle of contentious finance bills and transition back to sustainable wealth creation? The solution requires structural, institutional adjustments. First, re-empowering economic planning as a mandatory advisory body. We must elevate the State Department for Economic Planning so it is no longer just a sub-department of the Treasury. It should function with statutory independence. Before any finance bill is presented to Parliament, this planning department must table a mandatory public economic impact assessment. If a proposed tax will kill a domestic manufacturing sector, the public and Parliament must see that data explicitly before a vote is cast. Second, legislative gating via the Public Finance Management Act. Parliament must tighten the PFM Act to mandate that no mega-project can receive funding unless it carries an independent certification proving its immediate capacity to generate local economic velocity. We must stop borrowing for projects that do not put money back into the pockets of the local supply chain. Third, balancing Treasury's key performance indicators. The National Treasury's success should not be measured solely by whether the KRA hits its tax collection targets. Instead, the Treasury's performance targets must be legally tethered to broader economic health metrics, such as private sector credit growth, domestic manufacturing output, and the reduction of compliance costs for small businesses. Section 6, Route through. A country cannot tax its way into prosperity, it must plan its way there. The path out of our current fiscal bottleneck is not found by simply rewriting the tax percentages every June. It is found by restoring the intellectual balance of our governance machinery, ensuring that the voices focused on growing the economy are just as powerful as the voices tasked with collecting the revenue. What are your thoughts on this institutional approach? How can we better balance fiscal survival with economic growth? Let's have a constructive, structured discussion in the comments below. If you valued this deep dive into institutional design, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this video. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next analysis.